Hi, year four. Okay, so I hope you had a really good weekend. Just to remind you, so we're on chapter 18, and they're out in the New Forest, and they're training Jeffrey to be a better chimpanzee, giving him a bit more space. When all of a sudden, the Bolds hear a car. So, chapter 18 starts. The Bolds looked at each other in alarm. Yes, the car was certainly heading their way. "I'll go and wake up Uncle Tony. He's too deaf to hear us calling him," said Mrs. Bold, heading quickly for a sunny spot from where the gentle snoring of an elderly hyena was coming. She shook Uncle Tony awake. "Something's happening. Not sure what. You better wake up and get in the car, Uncle Tony." Half asleep, the old boy needed help from Mrs. Bold to stand up. She walked him quickly to the car, where he joined a worried-looking Betty and Bobby on the back seat. By now, the approaching car was just a few hundred meters away, weaving through the trees, headlights on. "It was some kind of jeep," guessed Mr. Bold. "Where's Mr. McNumpty?" asked Mrs. Bold. "He wandered off to do his business. I don't know in which direction." "Oh, no," said a worried Amelia. The jeep then arrived, and a man and a woman got out, forest wardens, wearing official uniforms and looking rather cross. That's what they look like. "Hey," shouted the woman sternly, "what are you doing in this part of the forest?" "Oh, hello there," said Mr. Bold with his widest smile. "Us? Here? Oh, yes, so we are." "You're in a conservation area," said the man accusingly. "Did you not see the signs?" "Signs? Why, no, we saw no signs," said Mr. Bold. "Did you see any signs, Mrs. Bold?" "I saw no sign of a sign," replied Amelia. "We definitely didn't see any signs at all," confirmed Mr. Bold. "Well, you shouldn't be here," said the first warden. No, we definitely shouldn't," said Mr. Bold, thinking it was always best to agree with authority figures. "I blame the car," he said, giving the Honda a light slap. "Naughty, naughty car." "Why is it the car's fault?" asked the warden. "It's very lazy," said Mr. Bold, shaking his head. "A lazy car?" asked the man, scratching his head. "Oh, yes," continued Mr. Bold. "It's the wheels. Always tired." "Tired? Tired! Do you get it? Tired wheels!" Mrs. Bold giggled. "Oh, very good, Fred." But the warden did not. So Mr. Bold decided to tell another joke. "What do you get when dinosaurs crash their cars?" "Tyrannosaurus Rex!" The twins and Uncle Tony giggled from inside the car. Bobby wound down the window so as not to miss the next joke. "What do you get when you cross a fly, a car, and a dog?" "A flying carpet!" Mrs. Bold, Bobby, Betty, and Uncle Tony laughed heartily. The bright blanket covering Imamu vibrated too. "More, more!" cried the twins. "Now listen," said the warden, with his hands on his hips. "We're very busy, and I haven't got time to listen to all this nonsense. I'm here to tell you off. You're trespassing." Mr. Bold thought for a moment. Jokes were usually the answer to any predicament, and so he pressed on and tried another. "Why was the woman fired from the car assembly line?" "Because she was caught taking a break." But the wardens were stony-faced. "One more," thought Fred. "What has 4 wheels and flies?" Then, before he could give the answer, the female warden jumped in. "A rubbish truck!" "Wow, you knew that one," said Mr. Bold, impressed. "A lucky guess," said the warden, smiling modestly. But her partner tapped his foot impatiently. "Ahem!" He cleared his throat. "You and your family should not be in this part of the forest. Do you understand? This is for wildlife only. You are disturbing the animals." There was a muffled bark from under the blanket in the car. "What was that?" asked the warden, suspiciously. "Oh, excuse me," said Uncle Tony, patting his stomach. "Bit of indigestion." "You must leave straight away," continued the warden, taking out a notebook and pen and writing down the registration number of the blue Honda. "Oh, but we can't leave," said Mrs. Bold, sounding alarmed and looking into the trees. "Not yet." "Excuse me," said the warden. My wife just means that our neighbour, Mr. McNumpty, has gone to answer the call of nature, explained Fred. He won't be long. Well, where is he? Asked the warden. Said Fred vaguely. He's a very private man. In fact, that's why we had to drive so far into the forest, so we could find somewhere quiet to, perform, as it were. He couldn't bear anyone around while he's, dropping the kids off at the pool, if you know what I mean. I'm sure you understand. Not really, no. You run along, and we will be off just as soon as he's done. We're terribly sorry for the misunderstanding. We'll stay on the roads in the future. Good day to you. But Fred's attempts to get rid of the wardens weren't working. There's a problem in this area with poachers, Mr. Bold. Fred Bold. This is my lovely wife Amelia and our two mischievous twins, Bobby and Betty, there in the car with dear Uncle Tony. Not as young as he used to be, but he still has all of his own teeth. Mr. Bold, interrupted the male warden, getting exasperated with Fred's time wasting. You and your family do not seem to fit the usual description of poachers, but nevertheless I would be failing my duty if I did not see you out of the woods before I went on my way, if that's all right with you. Of course, Mr. Warden. Quite right. There was an awkward pause, during which the warden looked at his watch and raised his eyebrows. So, where's your mysterious friend, Mr. Bold? Does he usually take this long in the, bathroom? Said Mr. Bold. Just then there was a rustling from a clump of ferns a few meters away, and there was Mr. McNumpty, lumbering somewhat awkwardly towards them, his big coat buttoned up to the collar. Yoo-hoo, he said. That's better. Sorry to keep you. Last night's brown rice and aubergine bake was just working its way through. He rubbed his tummy. Oh, I see. We have visitors. Nigel, these are the new forest wardens. We shouldn't be here, and they want us to leave, said Mr. Bold. Right-o, said Mr. McNumpty, who seemed to have gotten wider than before. I'll squeeze into the car then, shall I, and we'll be off. He winked at Mrs. Bold, who tapped the side of his nose. Don't mind if I take the front seat, would you? But what about began Betty, but her sentence was interrupted by Mrs. Bold. Shift up in the back, children, she said brightly. Fred, start the car. Stay on the roads in the future, please, said the male warden sternly. We will do. Many apologies. Very silly of us, said Mrs. Bold. As Mr. McNumpty lowered himself into the front seat, there was a squeak from inside of his coat and an oof from somewhere round his nether regions. Ah, tally-ho, said Mr. McNumpty loudly. I really must go on a diet sometimes. I really must. Sorry for the misunderstanding, Mr. and Miss Warden, said Mr. Bold, putting the car into first gear and slowly driving off through the trees in the direction of the track. The wardens got into their jeep and followed the Bold's Honda, each keeping a close eye on the strange family in the blue car ahead. But Miranda and Geoffrey, said a worried Bobby in a loud whisper. We can't leave them behind. Don't worry, I don't think we have, said Mrs. Bold, pointing discreetly at Mr. McNumpty sitting in front of her. Then Mr. McNumpty undid the top button of his coat and put his snout inside. Hold on, chaps, he said, not much longer. A strangled cry and a breathless groan seemed to have come from somewhere inside his coat, which seemed to be moving about in a very unusual way. Oh, no! Has he swallowed them? Asked Betty. I hope not. We'll find out in another minute, said her mother. A few minutes later, they were out of the woods and on the main track. Shortly after, the warden's jeep tooted them, and the wardens raised their hands in a half-wave, half-salute goodbye. Bye! Called Mr. Bold. Hurry-uppy! Came a cry from inside Mr. McNumpty's coat. Then there was a ripping sound, and a large, hairy leg emerged from the shoulder. I've got a cramp, help! That's Geoffrey, said Betty. However did he hide himself in Mr. McNumpty's coat? Pull over and I'll show you, said Nigel. By now the lower leg of the chimp man had wound itself round the back of his thick grizzly bear neck, the foot waving about with distress. Mr. Bold checked in his rear-view mirror to see that the warden's jeep was out of sight. It was, and so he pulled over and jumped out of the car and ran round to the passenger side. "Let's get you out quickly," he said. Mr. McNumpty got his legs out of the car, but was struggling to lower his head out of the door frame. "Oops! Can you pull me, please, Fred? I'm stuck," he said, sounding desperate. "Soon as you can." "I'll help," said Amelia, jumping out of the back seat. "Bobby and Betty, you push from the inside." In the end, it took all of the Bolds several minutes to get the enlarged Mr. McNumpty out of the Honda. By then, 2 legs and a monkey's head appeared through the various rips in his coat. "Oh, at last," said Mr. McNumpty, finally standing on the grass verge. He let out a massive sigh of relief, and then quickly unbuttoned his coat and dropped it to the ground, revealing the 2 stowaways. Geoffrey was upside down, panting for breath, his head between his host's legs. His strong arms were clinging to Mr. McNumpty's waist, his knees over Nigel's shoulders, and his body flattened against Nigel's back. Miranda, looking very hot and squashed, had her little arms round his tummy, and the rest of her was squeezed in between Geoffrey's legs. She leaped to freedom straight away and lay on the grass, breathing in the lovely fresh air. "Poor Miranda looks cross-eyed," said Mrs. Bold, giving the poor animal a gentle pat on the back. "There she is." Miranda looked thankful and then bounded over to her favourite place on Uncle Tony's shoulder. "Me very hotty bothery," she squeaked. Free at last, Geoffrey did a sort of somersault, landing on his feet. He wriggled his cramped feet and grinned happily at everyone. "Whew!" was all he said between breath. "Whew, whew, whew!" "How clever of you, Nigel," said Mrs. Bold. "I didn't know what we were going to do. The wardens were insisting we leave the woods, and as far as I knew, poor Miranda and Geoffrey were high up in the trees. We almost had to abandon them." Mr. McNumpty was busy adjusting his tie. "Fear not, I heard those pesky wardens' cars while I was, making myself comfortable in the ferns." "And we see Mr. McNumpty from Trickby Treetop," joined in Miranda. "I could smell trouble," continued Mr. McNumpty. "Not surprised, given what you were up to," said Fred. "No, I don't mean Pooh. Fred, really," said Nigel indignantly. "I mean trouble for Miranda and Geoffrey. Our experiment, to let them be real apes in real trees, was in grave danger of going very wrong. So I whistled. We signalled to each other. Hand signals, or paw signals, if you prefer. While you were telling your jokes to the wardens, I concealed them in my person. Not easy for any of us. But hey-ho, here we are, still in one piece, apart from my coat, and still all together." "Hurrah! Don't know what I would have done without my Miranda," said Uncle Tony. "Three cheers for Mr. McNumpty." But their cheers were interrupted by an angry banging sound coming from the boot of the car. "Oh, Mum!" cried Fred, rushing into the Honda and opening the boot. Imamu leaped out, looking furious. "Fancy forgetting about me," she said. "Sorry, Mum, there was a bit of an emergency." "So I understand," snapped Imamu. "I look forward to hearing what sort of emergency means that you had to shove your own mother under a smelly old blanket and lock her inside of a cramped car boot. I've got a good mind to." But her tirade was interrupted when she caught sight of something out of the corner of her eye. A squirrel was peering at the strange gathering from a branch of a tree a few meters away. Within 5 seconds, Imamu had run, lightning speed, caught, and eaten it. "There," she said, spitting out a bit of squirrel tail. "That's put me in a better mood. The day is suddenly improved." "We're not allowed to do that," said Betty, feeling a little jealous. "Shame," said Imamu. "That's because you live like humans, I expect. Not many humans go round eating squirrels. But I, should you need reminding, am a wild hyena. I eat squirrels. So there. And if there was a deer about, I'd eat that too. She looked around hungrily. Let's all get back in the car and go home, said Fred a little agitatedly, before the wardens come to see what we're up to again. That is the end of chapter 18. We'll have to find out what they do in chapter 19 tomorrow. Bye, Year 4.